Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, HP Change Management Process Designer Product Demonstration. My name is Audra Kutz, and I'm one of the Vivit Minnesota chapter co-leaders. I'm with Advanced Marketplace. We're a very credible HP partner in the space and have been for, goodness, quite a while. This webinar today is brought to you by the Vivit Minnesota chapter, and my co-leaders are also Warren McLeod, Prashant Sarnaik, and Laura Walker. Today's presenters are going to be John Stegeman. He's a principal consultant here at Advanced Marketplace, and Mary Lynn Lawrence. She is our VP of Services. Some housekeeping. This is a live session. It's being recorded, so you can reference it later, share it with anyone else you'd like to. They're available to all chapter members. If you have any questions as we go along, please type and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. And this next slide shows you that. Here's a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel, and it usually appears in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. To submit a question, make sure the questions pane is expanded and type in your question and click send. With that, we're going to get started. Our agenda is we're going to do some brief introductions. John has informed me I have 5 minutes to whip through these intro slides because he really wants to dig into the product demonstration as quick as possible, and I'm sure that you would all appreciate that as well. So we'll do a quick overview of Advanced Marketplace and our credibility in this space, because you probably want to know, if you don't already, who are these people and how did they get so good at this stuff. My name is Audra Kutz. I'm the sales manager for the Midwest part of the country. His picture of me and my kids and my dog. So if you hear some whining in the background, it's not me. His name is Calvin. If anybody has any suggestions for how to deal with dog hair besides vacuuming all the time, I welcome your help. He's a newer addition to our family. I've been in the ITSM industry since 1999, and here are just some of my credentials that I will just kind of scoot past really quickly. Mary Lynn Lawrence is one of our presenters, as I said earlier. She's our VP of Services, and here is a lovely picture of Mary Lynn and her family. Mary Lynn, so everybody can know who you are and recognize your voice, if you want to just say hello and a couple things about you.
Thanks, Audra. My past is with the Peregrine Systems legacy, and we've grown up from that, as you'll see on the next slide, to, I know, the service manager, asset manager side of things, but we've grown into some of the other HP DTO suite areas. This is my husband and my kids, and we're at a niece's wedding. So, Audra, do you want to hop to the next slide here, and I'll go down through that?
Well, first, yeah, you know what? Let's do that.
John.
We'll come back to John. We'll come back to John. Go ahead. You can talk about our credentials. I'll go back to John.
Yes, that sounds good. Audra and I are a little under stress here because John is truly timing us, and as you'll get to know in the presentation, John is a very strong force that makes sure you understand what he's talking about. So I'm a little afraid of him, so I'm going to go knocking through these slides here. So for those of you who don't know us, we do many things with HP and the DTO product suite. We're an implementer of Service Manager, Asset Manager, the connectors, and the discovery tools. We also do a lot of training for HP, and along with the training in the Service Manager suite and Asset Manager and UCMDB, we also have teamed with HP Software Education in course development to help them put up the new materials for the most updated versions of Service Manager. We're currently working with HP now to develop the materials for executive scorecards. We're also always a participant in the HP Early Adopter Program, and for those of you who joined us a couple of months ago, as part of that program, we upgraded to a customer that presented on here with us to Service Manager 9.3. So lots of legacy Peregrine experience, but also lots of UCMDB, VHC, and other HP technologies. We have a lot of experience in that. And we're also most recently getting involved with the HP product management team in an initiative to move people to the most current versions of Service Manager. I'll turn it over to Audra and John.
All right. Excellent synopsis, Marilyn, of our credentials. Good job. John Stegeman is our main star of the show today. He is a principal consultant here at Advanced Marketplace with a very stellar resume. And John, I'll let you explain your picture and a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump in.
That's my twin brother and I. I don't know who's who. Clearly it's a little bit older of a picture. Strollers were not the massive SUV-like items they are today. I started working with Service Center at version 2.1, so I have a lot of experience with the tool. My initial 10 years of work was at one of the customers with the mythical unlimited seat, unlimited server license. So it meant you did everything with it. Highly tailored environment. Have administration experience, training experience, and development experience from standard tailoring through custom module deployment. I do a lot of process workshop and align work with streamlining processes to result in a simpler workflow. I have a high level of expertise with change management, so that's one of the reasons I'm so interested in the new process designer flows for change management. So, and I do a lot of training for service managers. So, for example, I unfortunately have to go to Malta next week for a partner summit. So I get to teach Service Manager Advanced next week. So back to you,
sorry
Audra.
for you.
Okay,
we're going to go.
It's just awful to go to Mediterranean.
It is awful. You have to go to Malta. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to jump into 3 quick overview slides and then get into the demo. So, John?
So the objective today is not to walk you through what the process designer documentation can tell you. This is not the sales presentation on process designer. If you want to know about process designer at a basic level, content pack, it's distributed through what's called a content pack, and they distribute those for Service Manager through HP Live Network. There's another content pack up there for HTML email for Service Manager 930, where you can actually, instead of sending the plain text emails out of Service Manager you do today, there's a utility to upgrade the notification engine so you can use HTML formatted emails. So that's another example of a content pack. There's 3 core documents in the Process Designer content pack. The Processes and Best Practices Guide is similar to the one that we have for 930. It walks through the process in out-of-box forms and how the change categories work. And the biggest shift with Process Designer is they've moved to ITIL version 3 workflows. So the out-of-box categories are normal, standard, emergency. Now, that just so happens to be the way every change system that I've built for the last 5 years has set up their standard categories. So they based that on a whole lot of interviews with partners and customers about what was actually being deployed in the field and based on ITIL best practice. So they did discover that the out-of-box change workflows that came in with 710 weren't being broadly deployed. So that's one of the big reasons for the change in the base model. The Process Designer Admin Guide, it's the How Do I Guide, but it's right now, it's early, so while it tells you about the functionality, it's more about, well, if I'm starting from scratch, how do I? But it doesn't really talk to you about, well, I did it this way in the old tool, how do I do it this way? So we're going to talk about that some. And then the Applications Patch Manager Guide is how do I apply a content patch to an existing system? So those are the 3 documents. The 2 major components of the Process Designer Change Management Engine are the shiny one, the new workflows. How do you build workflows? You know, how do you, it's a huge leap in, I think, the ability for people to be able to effectively tailor without having to spend a year learning how to develop Service Manager. Today, the tailoring skill set isn't really different from the developer skill set. And this gives us sort of an intermediate tier where implementers won't really have to know everything about the display application and the document engine in order to make things work. And the other big change is as modules move to Process Designer, they get a new role-based security model. And it replaces what today I know from training is a conceptually very difficult model to understand of it could be in the capability word or in the profile or here or there in the environment or there or somewhere else. How do all those fit together? And the nice thing about a role-based model is it starts to set us up where you could assign roles in your LDAP repository and map them to Service Manager, because a lot of companies don't want to maintain roles in every application. So, Audra, if you go to the next slide.
Sure.
So, what I want to talk to you about is an experience taking the content pack and applying it to an actual customer system. So we're going to talk very quickly about how that system was organized and some of the specific things about it that were challenging after we upgraded it. One of the most important things that I have to point out, though, is if you've used tailored category and phase names, like, I don't know, normal, standard, and emergency, one of the biggest changes in Process Designer is the out-of-box HP objects. So the out-of-box HP category, phase, rule sets cannot be modified. So if you want to do something different, you copy them and you use your copied workflow and make modifications to that. But you can't modify the out-of-box. Well, turns out on a content pack application, if you have a normal category or you have an implementation phase, and that's the same name as the new phase, your phase doesn't really upgrade right because you get merged into the existing out-of-box phase. So one of the things that I did on my second attempt was I put in a cascade update behind category and a cascade update behind phase. So I renamed my categories and phases so none of them were the same as the names in the new HP workflows. And that was really easy, but nothing told me I had to do it. So that's one of the things we learned. Now, before you can apply a content pack, it has to be on 930. You have to be on the 930.0 applications. The pack is not yet compatible with patch 1. I found that out because I, of course, applied it after applying patch 1. So I did it again. They are working on that. You also need to be on patch 2 for web tier, the server RTE, and the Windows client. So it's applications, it's not application patch 1 that came out in January, but you need to be on patch 2. And they also are now working on updates so you could be on patch 3 and you can be on application patch 1. So if you can go to the next slide, Audra. So then we're going to go through the post-upgrade system. That's when we get to look at Process Design. You know, my workflows didn't work right. So in some cases, it's, well, should they work? And the other one is, well, how do I fix it? And how do I remap that legacy functionality using a Process Designer method instead of the old way of thinking? And the statement here that I make, don't try to rebuild the old engine in the new engine. It just limits the new one. When I go into a customer site to deploy Service Manager, one of the first conversations I have, particularly if their requirements are written and you can tell that a lot is, well, this is how we do it in our current tool. We want to do it that way in Service Manager. And I always give the feedback that no, I really can't recommend that because Service Manager does that this way. And that's how that process is encoded in Service Manager. So if we leverage that out-of-box method and extend it, like, oh, maybe you need an extra element, we're more consistent, but we also can better leverage Service Manager's capability. Well, the same thing's true of, you don't want to force Process Designer to work like change workflows have traditionally worked, because then you won't be able to leverage all the neat things that Process Designer can do. So Audra, if you want to put control over to me, I've just got some quick documents to walk through the pre-upgrade system. I don't want to demo that system. We're going to walk through that. And
okay.
So let me show the right screen here. I need to get the right one. Okay. So can you see the that was the wrong one. The change categories document now?
Looks great.
Yeah, but it's kind of cut off on the left side a little bit.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why it's cut off. But the idea is that that current system, the system we went to upgrade, we did normal, exception, and emergency. And you'll see the workflows are really simple. Draft, management review, implementation, post-implementation review. Notice that implementation, approve, and implement were in the same phase. Well, why? Well, they wanted all the tasks added before they approved, and they didn't want to have to go in and close the phase manually once it was approved. And you know, it's kind of difficult in the old workflow to make phases automatically close when they're approved. You can do it, but standard, it's very simple. Draft to implementation and closure, there's no approvals. I'll show you one of the things we knew we had to upgrade in another picture here. And then their emergency flow, emergency change logging, and then acceptance and acceptance, where they do a post-implementation review, and they do most of their approvals after the fact for emergency. So, so for standard and for emergency, we used the ability that, you know, service managers always had to call a change open script. So when they selected a standard change, they were prompted to select one of the change models, and we had created a change model table for standard changes. And we did that instead of leveraging templates, because we wanted, there's out of box, you can't filter templates to a given category, or you can't make it so that when they pick it's by assignment group or service. It's all based on user role, and we didn't want to have to set up 100 user roles just to filter templates. So what happens is they say they want the hardware templates, they pick the template they want, pre-fills the ticket, the fields are read-only. So we wanted to replicate that functionality. For an emergency change, when they go to open an emergency, they get a screen saying, well, here's the policy, and one of their rules is you must have a currently open high priority incident. And because we don't want them to have to open it from the incident, we let them select the incident from the script, and when they save that, it'll build the relationship automatically. In this case, they haven't deployed incident yet, so right now the script says put in the ticket number from your other system. But once they're ready, we turn this panel off, and they do it. It'll actually link it to the incident. And then the emergency change form comes up. So we wanted to have something similar to that as well. There's a couple other things. In a normal change, once it's submitted for approval and for implementation, the problem is, well, what if the change owner wants to postpone it? Well, it's really hard to go back phases, and we had submission rules that they wanted to be different for reschedule versus original submit, so we added Reschedule Wizards. And the Reschedule Wizard for an end user, they have a Tuesday change meeting. So their rule for rescheduling was, you know, if it was Wednesday, sorry, you had to reschedule your change to the next change week. It had to be after the next Tuesday change meeting. So they had some rules around how you could reschedule. But then we also put in a Reschedule Wizard for the change admins, and they can do whatever they want. They can reschedule it for today. And when a user reschedules, all the approvals get reset. So when they move it to the next change week, everybody has to approve it again. And when a change admin reschedules, they can say, no, keep the current approvals, or they can say reset them, because they may do this as a result of the CAB deciding we need to move that change from Wednesday to Thursday. And because it's the CAB has the authority to say keep the current approvals, we built the wizard to support that. So there's one other thing from the old system, and I think this is really common. We used prompt for close when closing change phases. So in a change phase, you can either say just go right to the next phase, or you can say prompt for close, and you can tell the system to use a different form when closing a phase. So we use that to say, are you going to continue or cancel? And if you select cancel, we only prompt for comments because we know the completion code. And then what we did was we used all that stuff around phase pointers so that if you canceled at the end of the draft phase, we would say, okay, in the background, move it all the way to the end, mark everything closed, mark it canceled, and that way we're done. So one thing we knew from when they announced Process Designer at Discover was anything with phase pointers no longer works. The workflow engine doesn't use phase pointers. So I loved that because they just told us right up front, if you used phase pointers, you're going to need to replace those with a Process Designer transition. So we're going to look at how that works. What's the Process Designer transition? And then with a change form, with a task form, you know, my regular task form doesn't even have the closure fields on it. My close form did. So how do I replicate that in Process Designer? Because it turns out that after the upgrade, prompt for close doesn't work. So we're going to now go and look at Service Manager with Process Designer in place. So to get to Process Designer, the main components, it's under Tailoring Process Designer. And Workflows will take you, now can you see the whole screen here, or is it cut off to the right? Because when we tested yesterday, everything was working fine on the right. And what you'll see is some of these have a beautiful little HP logo. And those
That
means...
looks good, by the way, you just
Okay.
can't see the navigator, but otherwise it's fine.
So one of the nice things they've added here that I hope we get elsewhere is I can say group by this field. Ooh, great. So now my change ones are separate from my task ones. So what you can see is there's an HP proprietary normal change. And notice that was the problem. So when I first upgraded my system, I had a normal change. And when I upgraded, I only had one, and it was HP's. So that's why I renamed mine normal change. And I renamed my emergency change. And I probably didn't have to rename my standard because they actually put the word change on the end of that, but I just did it to be consistent. So if I go look at the normal change workflow, the workflow editor comes up. And I can click on a phase, and down below, I can see the various rules and things that apply to that phase. So what's the name of that phase? What's its display name? And who's allowed to edit it and when? What form is used to display this? Eventually, but not right now, you'll be able to also define additional forms. This is a known error. It's in the documentation. This doesn't work yet. It'll work later this spring. But here's the really cool part. Rule sets. On enter, on exit, initialization, on display, on update, after successful update. CHM mandatory. Well, what's our rule set? Well, let's go look at one. View. Change mandatory validation. Change coordinator when current phase and saved record equals registration and categorization, change owner, change coordinator, risk assessment are mandatory. So I'm going to click on this rule, and oh, darn it, I'm in an HP proprietary rule. I can't go farther. Ooh, but I can copy it later and I can look at it. So what I did when I created a new workflow is I copied all the HP ones so I could look at them, and we're going to see how that works. There are some actions here. So I have a button described set CI values and set CMI's DNZ. So there's one that's set CI planned value, location, button. And we're going to look at how do you add a button or wizard. Do I have approvals in this phase? Do I have alerts tied to this phase? So that's a phase. Now, all these little arrows are transitions. So in this case, I define a transition, and it's essentially the same as close phase used to be, but I call it request validation. Where do I want that to go? In the tray, in more options list. Or I don't have to remember if I want it to go in the tray, is it display option 100 to 150? And where does display option 402 show up? I don't need to know that anymore. It does it for me. Who's allowed to do it? What's the condition? What happens when I click that transition? I validate mandatory fields. I could launch a wizard. I can call anything that a rule can call. And rules can call a lot of stuff. Notice that validation has multiple directions. So this transition is I've rejected it. So you send it back to registration and categorization for that person to do more stuff. And notice when you reject, they tie that to a notification. CHM notification reject. Validate, abandon. Okay, we're just going to stop. You can abandon from any of the phases. But notice, look at how easy it was to move backwards. Yay! That's been very difficult historically in Service Manager. And all you have to do, let's say I want to be able to go backwards from risk. Oh, I can't do it because this is copied. I'll show you one that's not proprietary to show you how to add a transition. Oh, wait, maybe it'll let me. Yeah, so it let me. And so look, I've got a manual transmission, and I could call it revalidate. Tray. Who's allowed to do it? And if I don't put any rule sets, when they click that button, that'll show up as a button in the workflow, and that's how easy it is to add a display option to go a transition to go back a phase. So there's lots of flexibility in the workflow engine. Now this one's even more fun. See this one with a little thing on it? That means that that transition, if I can manage to select it, I'll select this one because this was also automated. That means that this transition is automatic. So if DCAB approval is denied, it automatically goes back to build and test. And if DCAB approval, having trouble selecting this, this particular, but this is, if it's approved, once it's approved, automatically go to deployment. So that's really, really, that's something that was also challenging to do in the old system that's real easy now. So it's really easy to automate transition between phases. The other nice thing is because these transitions are automated, this doesn't, it's not as hard to go. This looks like 8 phases, but it's not really, because this is just like a decision step and it resolves itself. So you're not putting in phases just to manage somebody having to go in and update the tool to make your workflow continue. So now we're going to look at some of the upgraded categories. And first, well, I'll go into a normal change, an out-of-box normal one, so you can just see what the change looks like and what's new. So this is an out-of-box change, and so they've reorganized the form again. They've done something that I've always thought the title worked well at the top, so I'm happy. And notice that our transition in the tray appears with its exact name as a button. So I can click Request TCAB Approval, and looks like I failed a validation. Oh wait, no, so now I'm in TCAB Approval. So they've rethought the forms somewhat, and I think they've done, I think the out-of-box forms are as good as I've ever seen them. Right now you have to scroll on the workflow because it's a little bit long. The workflow is easier, I think, to understand than the current one. But so those actions are actually, instead of just close phase or close change, those actions, those transitions are much more explicit in the toolbar. So you're going to the next phase, you're going back. So if I now look at one of my upgraded workflows, I'm going to look at my upgraded normal change. So notice I put my workflow at the very top of the workflow window. That's so that when you look at the workflow in the ticket, I don't have wasted space above it. So I prepare for change submission, management review, approve and implement, post-implement, and close. And this workflow came in completely automatically from the upgrade. It does attempt to convert your workflow for you. So if I look at change management under configuration, you'll see categories, models, workflows. You notice phases is gone. They're still there in the background, and that's where some of the issues with an upgraded category can be challenging. There's also an option under administration, under settings, to say how do you want to select changes, change model or category. And what they've moved to is when you go to open a new change, you can pick change models. And the advantage of change models, if I go look at change models, is that a change model not a good one. I'm looking for one that already includes tasks. I went in the wrong direction. Activate patch, I think that's. Notice that this change model says to automatically create a task to perform plan schedule starting at the plan and schedule phase, and that has to be closed by the execution phase. To perform change execution has to be automatically opens at the execution phase and has to be closed by post-implementation. We've got a very powerful task engine now. But I don't have time for that because we're going to talk about what happens when you upgrade. So if I go look at my normal change, I've got one already in the draft phase. So when I went to close this, remember I had prompt for close enabled. Well, I also had, I should be able to have open tasks and have it continue. And the problem is that right now is broken. So anything I mention right now that's broken, there's a case open. So I've updated my task forms to not use a separate prompt for close form. So I can close my task because I've updated it to be consistent with what the process designer workflow is letting me do. That doesn't mean that prompt for close won't be fixed if they decide to patch it in process designer, but I elected instead to just make it work the process designer way. So I didn't keep it with the old phase, with that option. So now if I save, but here's what happens when I try to close my change phase. I get it, I get my validations because I'm not in the future. I'm getting all my normal change rules applied. Let me just make sure everything's filled in. Customer system, okay. Save. And next phase. Why did I fix that? I'll try next phase on this one. So I get my continue or cancel, and it's not displayed correctly, but more importantly, I don't have save, I don't have OK. It hasn't come up yet, but actually what happens is the display screen that this depends on hasn't been updated to work with Process Designer. So I can't do that. The other problem is my cancel workflow depended on on the phase pointer. So how did I fix that in the first phase so that I was able to close my first phase? Well, let's look. So here's my first phase. And by the way, all the validations, it still will use your format control validations. So if you've got form-based validations, those will be good. If you've got a whole lot of validations in CM3R, you use master format control, you'll want to go in and make sure you limit those to just your upgraded categories so they don't impact the out-of-box categories. So what form does this use? U.S. change logging. The customer here is part of the U.S. government, so that was our prefix. On exit, so what are my rule sets? Now in this case, my rules are in my format control, and I didn't have to write them again. So I have them up, but what I did change was this transition. And I said, for this transition, go to the next phase. And I made one other change. So if I go to Database Manager, there's my error finally from that phase not closing right. I'm not sure why on this particular system I'm running into a problem with that. So if I go to the phase record, which is in CM3R cat phase, they've now made that read-only because it's synchronized with the workflow engine. So I can also get there. I would have done this right away, but I forgot. I can also get there directly from here, so additional phase information. And the problem I had before was I had said prompt for close, allow cancel, and when they're closing, use this different form. And so what I did instead was now I just said don't do that. So that's how I got that to work. We also used to have open scripts. So how did I, when I go to open a new change, so let's say I want to open a standard change, and here's my custom one. So I created one subcategory under my standard so I could set up a standard change model. And here's my little form to pick my model, and I'll pick it. Click OK. So now my standard change is filled in. Save. Yay, nothing's blown up yet. Please enter plan start. Do I have any templates so I can do this quickly? I think that one works. Save. I should have made all these November so my templates would last forever. So now I've got my change added. I'm just going to look real quick to make sure I've got, it's going to require a test log, but it only needs one of the fields. I need to work that. So now I will try to close this phase, and I think I've updated standard. It might be emergency. So notice it's validating for me right away for closure that I have to put that in. So it's still not going to let me go to the next phase without validating. It just didn't give me an extra close form. So now I'm in my implementation and closure phase. So if I try to close this, again, I can do the same thing. So I've got completion code, and I can do it all based on the same form. So I just said in this example, well, don't use my closure forms. Just make it part of the main form. So now I can populate my close fields and save my record. So that, in a way, is more consistent with how the out-of-box work, the new process designer workflow wants to work. So a lot of times when you change, you'll instead of validating extra fields at the end of the phase, you'll do them to open the next phase or to exit. So that's done. But what if you really want a prompt for closure? So I have an emergency change, and I have one in my logging and implement phase. And I want to make sure that when they close this phase, that I prompt them for extra information. Now, I can't do it with the old prompt for close form, but when I say submit for review or closure, why look, I have closure code, successful. close your comments. Everyone just types done, annoying the change manager, finish. And right now there's I need to figure out why my wizard runs again at close. I just need to fix that. So how did I do that so that that came up that way? If I go look at my emergency workflow, and it's going to warn me I had a workflow I hadn't saved, and you can only have one workflow up at a time. So my initial phase on my transition, I said, for this transition, call this rule set, FIT, fiscal IT, change closure wizard. Okay, well, what does that do? View. Run the change closure wizard. All right, well, let's look at that some more. Edit. Run the wizard. If the current phase in the saved record is closure and the current phase does not equal abandoned. So it won't let them, this option won't appear otherwise. And the wizard to run is FIT closure. What if I want to change this condition? Edit. Add condition. Or add expression. Current record active, I'm just going to pick that one because it's easy, equals value. It knows that current record is a Boolean, true. Apply. Okay. I didn't need to know rad. Oh my God. You'll be able to do this more easily and faster. And the nice thing is that this rule is associated with a table. So let's say you build a custom labor array on every darn ticket. Well, you can make the code and the rules for processing those labor calculations available to all those tables and reuse them. Yay, we can reuse code. So if I go back, that's what and then, I had to build that little wizard. But the other thing we had was when I open a change like a normal or standard, remember I had that open script. So I went through to open my standard change and it prompted me for information. So how did I call that script? Because even though the old phase record for my standard change used to have a value in this script for @open, call the script, it wasn't working. So to make my workflow for my standard change, call my open script, I tried about 400 different ways, and one of the things you may notice is sometimes when you have to get this just right, so it's the drag symbol when you want to move things. If it's not the drag symbol and it's narrow, you'll accidentally add a phase. But on the upgrade, sometimes, the boxes aren't sized ideally, and that's pretty easy to fix. So I tried calling rule sets, and I just couldn't get it to open initially. So the way I got that to run at the start was I did it by using the change model for my upgraded standard change, and I told it to call a wizard. And if I look at that wizard, I could have built a whole fancy wizard, but I'm lazy. Instead, I just said, call my script. So I told it, US change open script. So I told it to take the file passed in, where did I do this? Because the format control doesn't run my somewhere. Let me step out. But anyway, I I did the same thing for my emergency. Let me look at how I set it up for emergency because I'm just not following it right. So for emergency, no, I didn't. Sorry, but what I did was I call my script instead of calling the upgraded standard change that way. I call my wizard, and I use the wizard to run the script. So I don't call my script from the phase. I call it from the wizard. And I'm just trying to, so that's one way to call on open. Now, in any other workflow, you might say, well, I want to call a wizard at the start of this phase, or call a script. Well, instead, you can apply a script to the transition. So the other thing I mentioned was we also, for the normal change workflow, we had a wizard that was called in the implementation phase. And the option to call that wizard was based on a display option. And one of the challenges with a display option is you lose all your custom display options when you upgrade to Process Designer. And you don't really lose them, it's that they've changed all the display screen names, so it won't access yours anymore. So how do you add an option in Process Designer? Well, forms, rule sets, actions. Oh, well, here's an action. Reschedule normal change. Call wizard, reschedule normal change. Put it in the more options list. Edit. Put it in the tray. Put it in the button. Who can do it? Admin in change equals true. Now that's a little different. That's based on the new security rule set policies. What action happens when I complete this process? And does it require a lock? Now the neat thing is I put this in here, and if I've got a normal change in the implementation phase, yes. All I did was add that to the workflow, and I have reschedule normal change. Now, why am I saying that with this tone of, oh my God, oh my God? Because I was able to add a display option, and I didn't have to know anything about display options or display screens or RAD syntax or how the document engine works. That was easy. So they've made it possible with the new workflow engine to add actions, to apply rules. So let's say I wanted to apply another rule on update. Click Add. I want to reapply all of my mandatory rules. Done. Now, let's look at that. What does that validate? And notice in this case, I used an HP standard rule in my custom workflow. I used a proprietary HP rule. So of course, when you add custom ones, I'm going to recommend that you use your company prefix. So here's a rule that I created. So I can also get to those custom rules from the Rule Sets menu. And I'm just going to look for my one starting with FIT. So here's my FIT closure wizard. So if I go look at my normal, that's what I added to my emergency flow that presented my closure information. And where did I get the idea to do that? Well, like everything in Service Manager, I copied and modified. because the out-of-box change workflows, when you go to close the change, does the exact same thing. It calls a closure wizard to prompt for the required fields. So I looked at how they did it out of box, and I stole it, because that's the fastest way to develop. So I copied what they did, and I used it in mine. The other rule sets, so, you know, I had, how did I call my change open script? How did I, so, you know, this was attempting to call a script, call the US RFC open script when expression equals true. So that's all the time. My rescheduled change wizard. So my rule is run the wizard, edit rule. And because the condition is blank, it's available. This rule doesn't have a separate condition on it. And the reason that was available from as an action was I said, not only make this a rule, but make it available as an action that you can select when defining a workflow. So if I click here to add a rule set, I see a whole lot of stuff. But if I say actions, I only see the actions that have been explicitly exposed, the rule sets that have been exposed as available for actions. And those are organized by table. So I've taken up pretty much all the time I have, but the big thing is that I had more trouble getting this to work when I kept focusing on how it used to work. And when I got to the point where I said, well, I don't care how it worked from the phase before, how do I prompt for close using this workflow editor? And I just built it that way. I would say it was easier to learn and easier to do than the old phase-based method ever was. I think it's fast. I think there's a lot of potential. And
hey,
if
John?
I were doing, so I'm pretty much done. So I'm not sure what the what questions. The first question out there, it's not extra. It literally, when you apply this, you are replacing the old workflow engine for change with the process designer one. 930 out of box moved knowledge management to process designer. So if you're upgrading a knowledge system, there were two big benefits to that. One, knowledge doesn't use change management for approval anymore. And why is that great? Because you don't need change management licenses to support your knowledge approval process anymore. They were kind of double dipping there. So it also meant that because knowledge had a very standard workflow, they could get their feet wet with process designer. So right now, only change and knowledge are enabled for workflows, for process designer. And they are slowly working on, and I'm just going to show you, if I go to the CM3R object, you can see that a lot's changed up here. We have workflow location by category. So that's new. They actually had to upgrade the process designer engine since the change version, because since 930 came out, because the original version only allowed one workflow per table. What you can't really tell is that every single one of these states is new. In the old system, they all started with the word CM. They've all been reworked to incorporate process designer. And security role-based access took over the old profile access. So if you do reuse an old script or try to use an old wizard, and in that script you called CM update save, that script will probably fail because CM update save has been rewritten for Process Designer. So you may have to tweak your code. It's not, but it's, and what I'd recommend if you were starting a new system, I'd do everything in Process Designer and rule sets that you could. It's possible to do things in format control. It does call format control. There's a document that's in the admin guide. It tells you when does it apply the Process Designer rule, then when does it apply the update condition in format control, and then when does it. I would leave format control for any upgraded categories, and I would use rule sets for everything new. That would be my recommendation. And right now, if I had a customer starting on 930, I would really recommend they go with Process Designer to simplify upgrades down the road, and there's some really neat functionality. I'd have to caution that, you know, there's a risk. It's early. We probably will find some bugs. I will tell you the cases I've opened so far for Process Designer have been approved and gone to development remarkably quickly. I've had really good support on the Process Designer tickets that I've opened. If I had an upgrade situation and they were upgrading to 930, I probably at this point would just recommend that we upgrade to the normal workflow unless they wanted to re-implement change as part of the product. So if they were re-implementing, I'd say try to put them on Process Designer. But if they're upgrading and they're happy with their current workflows, the upgrade, now there's a big, I understand there's another big patch of Process Designer coming out this spring. So my concerns about the risk of the upgrade and you know, the different things not working, that might make all the legacy stuff that with open scripts and prompt for close, that may restore that. So in that case, then the upgrade decision becomes a little bit easier. But right now, I'd be really hesitant to upgrade. So the next question, is there a plan to add other modules? Yes. So the last thing that I heard, and you can't hold me to this from the product release schedule, was that ESS interaction and incidents are next, problem, and then request is going to bring up the end, because request, I'm sure they're thrilled to be redoing request because that's an incredibly complex module. So eventually, though, they also, and you know, not yet, but eventually the workflow editor should be extensible even for custom tables. Another thing that's happening, and I want to make this clear, you can't edit workflows in Windows. This whole interface for designing the workflow is web only. And a lot of the administrative screens, so how you build wizards, they're working on a graphical wizards engine that will replace the current wizards engine. So imagine having this type of utility to build a wizard. I can't tell you how many times it took me before I finally got a wizard to work. Now I use them all the time, but it was a big threshold to get to where I was comfortable working with wizards. But imagine that you could build a workflow for a wizard graphically with rule sets. And so they're working on making those tailoring utilities more friendly. Are there any other questions? The question interface, if you can just type them in.
Well, we're pretty much at the top of the hour, and that looks like all the questions for now. Stephanie, are you on? Are you mic'd?
Yeah.
Hi
so,
there.
You know, sorry if this was a little bit around the board, but it's kind of hard to run through Process Designer so quickly. So
yeah, I just wanted to see what the follow-up process was for any questions people might have later.
Yes, if you guys think of some questions after we end the webinar today, my suggestion is to post them on the Minnesota chapter page on the Vivit website on the blog, and then we can have John answer those for you. And at the beginning of next week, look for an email. It will have the link for the slideshow and the question and answers, and also a link for the recording of today's webinar.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, well, I think we are at the end, John. You're very thorough, as always. Thank you so much for taking time today, right before you fly to Malta, to go through Process Designer. I know it's popular. A lot of people were interested in it, and I've actually had a lot of requests from other Vivit members that they're really excited to see the recording. They weren't able to make it today. So I just want to thank everyone for coming today, and we look forward to any follow-up questions. And I'm available for questions as well, too. So my contact information is on the Vivit website. I think that's it, and I think we can wrap it up. John, any final sentiments?
I think he went to have a margarita.
I hit mute. No, but I think the biggest thing is just it's almost we have to unlearn the way that we've tailored change, and in order to leverage what this can do. Like, I've been so busy on the workflow piece. Don't ask me anything about how the task sequencing works, but you can actually do task dependencies now too. So you can say, this change is in the this task is waiting until this one's done. And we've wanted that for 20 years. So there's a lot of neat stuff in there that, because it doesn't apply to this customer system I'm trying to replicate, that I haven't even explored yet. There's really a lot of good functionality in the workflow engine architecture. So,
okay. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up. We thank you so much for attending today and for the good questions and for your attentiveness, and we look forward to putting on our next webinar in a few months.